All right, welcome everyone to our Into the Deep this month, and we have with us today Father Gabriel Chiretta, who's actually my classmate throughout seminary, and he is a specialist in art and art history and pre-modern Japanese literature, among many other things, and he's going to talk with us today about beauty. And remember that these talks will be on the radio, and if you're listening to this on the radio, you can also watch the videos live on the St. Patrick Columbus website. And also, the format's going to be an hour-long talk, a short break, and then if you have any questions, save them for that time after the break, where Father Gabriel will be happy to answer all your questions. So, it's all yours.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus Christ, we give you great thanks that you give us this extraordinary gift of this evening when we can reflect together on the nature of the beauty that you are, the beauty that you reveal, and the beauty by which you make us like yourself. We ask that you would pour forth your Holy Spirit upon me, upon all of us as we listen and reflect together on these great mysteries, that together we might grow ever more deeply in our understanding of who you are, how you are for us, and how it is that you have made us for your beauty. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Late have I loved you, beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you. Lo, you were within, but I outside, seeking there for you. And upon the well-formed things you have made, I rushed headlong, I deformed. You were with me, but I was not with you. I was kept from you by those things. Yet had they not been in you, they would not have been at all. You cried, and you called, and you broke through my deafness, and you sent forth your beams, and shone upon me, and chased away my blindness. You breathed fragrance upon me, and I drew in my breath, and now pant for you. I tasted you, and now hunger and thirst for you. You touched me, and I have burned for your peace. With these words, some of the most glorious and poetic about Christ that I believe have ever been written, St. Augustine declares himself to have been drawn by God, to have given up at last all of his years of dissipation and still harder, spiritual pride, and to have accepted God at last as he truly is. With these words, St. Augustine declares himself to be the first person who was won for God by beauty. Now, what St. Augustine gives us here turns out to actually be the whole reason for Jesus Christ at all. Who is Jesus? Why the cross? How does he redeem us? All the questions that we explore all turn out to have the same one answer. Beauty. Beauty. Here's the proposal I'm making you tonight. That Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of God, the eternal Word of God, became man, suffered on the cross and died, rose from the dead and ascended into heaven so that he could reveal the beauty of God. And in so doing, that he could draw you and draw me into that same beauty. Why Jesus? It's the biggest question, in some sense the only question worth asking in the whole world, and it has one way of looking in a fairly complete way at the answer to this one question that we can spend our lives asking is this: why Jesus? To reveal the beauty of God, and in so doing, to make you beautiful with that same beauty. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought systematically about the nature of beauty, or tried to, but readily we run against lots of serious problems. In the culture at large, we have contradictory, wise cliches about beauty. So We say that beauty is only skin deep, which makes it seem like beauty is something that cannot really be trusted. But we also say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so that it's always valuable, but it doesn't really mean anything from one person to another. So we see that there's a deep contradiction in a lot of the ways in which we just kind of conventionally think about beauty. And if we start to look at it kind of from a more systematic, intellectual, especially philosophical perspective, the questions actually just get bigger and the problems seem to get deeper. So I don't know if you've ever done much looking into technical philosophical definitions of beauty, but I can assure you I've spent probably more time in my life doing so than is wise. And rather readily, one discovers that most of the answers that you find are almost tragic, actually, in their incomprehensibility. So, for example, Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher, defines beauty in this way. He says, "That is beautiful which is cognized without a concept as the object of a necessary satisfaction." Exactly. Hegel, following after him, speaking of the sublime, which is more or less the same thing, makes things, I suppose, a lot clearer when he says instead, "The relation of the idea to the objective world therefore becomes a negative one, since the idea, as something inward, is itself unsatisfied by such externality, and, as the inner universal substance thereof, it persists sublime above all this multiplicity of shapes which do not correspond to it." Yes. But I think you will agree with me that the German philosopher Schelling solves the problem once and for all when he says that beauty is posited wherever the particular real is so commensurate with its concept that the latter itself, as infinite, enters into the finite as intuited in concreto. The real in which it, the concept, appears, thereby becomes truly similar and equal to its own idea, the idea in which precisely this universal and this particular are in absolute identity. The rational, as rational, becomes simultaneously phenomenal and sensuous. Which I suppose is rather obvious, now that you hear it said in exactly that way. I know it's what you've always thought, but now you can be free to believe it. Now, okay, my point here is not just that philosophers are often too smart for their own good, and that maybe German philosophers should write less, but I don't know German, but it just seems like there's something, listen, the French don't have this problem. But anyway, it just seems that beauty is actually very hard to talk about when you actually want to talk about something and not just some feeling. That's at the heart of it. But the thing is, we do actually know this from our experience. This is, I think, some of the root experiential guidance behind some of these cliches about beauty. You know, that it's in the eye of the beholder, that it's only skin deep, et cetera, et cetera. So, for instance, I was in D.C. for the March for Life back in January, and I had the remarkable good fortune that I happened to have exactly 2 hours free in which I did not have to do anything with our teens, which was fantastic for entirely its own reasons. But I ended up at the National Gallery for Art, and it just so happened that they had this unbelievable, like once-in-a-lifetime collection of works by the Dutch and Netherlandish painter Johannes Vermeer, whom I adore, it just so happened to be actually the last day of this exhibit, which I had no idea. So I was like waiting in line for this and went in, and I spent the entire 2 hours in these like 3 rooms just hanging out with Vermeer and his contemporaries, and it was amazing. It was amazing. It was amazing. So, I mean, I was lost, enraptured, entranced. You know, I was just kept getting right up to these things, you know, and I would just spend. In fact, I was spending so long at individual images that one lady came up to me and said, "Sir, I noticed you're really liking these images, but you're holding up everybody else. So why don't you go ahead and not do that?" And I thought, no, you know. But what was really fascinating was, so because it was the last day, there were these huge lines. It was crazy. I'd never actually seen this before in an art gallery, where it was just perpetual flow of traffic just hugging the walls where the paintings were. And so, but I was nonetheless still. I didn't actually listen to her, so I was still like, you know, hugging the paintings. And about 2/3 of the way through the exhibit, the whole concept of it was that you had like Vermeer in the context of his contemporaries, and everyone sort of knows that Vermeer is sort of this like great genius, and his contemporaries are like, who's ever heard of these dudes? It's like Jan Steen, okay, whatever. By about 2/3 into the exhibit, the novelty had clearly worn off for most people, and so at every painting, I heard this many times. Different conversations from different people. One person would say, if it was a Vermeer, for instance, like, so this is like a lot better than the others, right? And the other person would be like, I don't know. I mean, it's supposed to be. It's like, can you tell why? No. Okay. And then they move on and be like, okay. I'm sure it's fine. Okay, so the thing is, experiences like this can lead us to this understanding of just these basic practical experiences of this sort of sense. Like maybe it is true, after all, that beauty is only kind of skin deep. Maybe it is really just in the eye of the beholder. That maybe this is just a subjective feeling in myself that was not happening in these other people, and okay, Likewise, we can have encounters of a dramatic kind with beauty in ways that can be hard to pin down, hard to explain why they happened in exactly this time, in exactly this way. I'll never forget one time, I was living in Tokyo for a summer doing research, pre-modern Japanese literature, don't forget. And Tokyo is horrible, turns out. Partly it was because I was like literally starving and I was dirt poor, but whatever, that's a different story. I was walking through like the horribly dingy, dirty, gray, death-like streets of Tokyo, and thinking happy thoughts. And I was wandered by this river, and there were these nasty road, the overpasses, and there were these giant concrete pylons digging into the river and stuff. And it was just so hauntingly beautiful. I just froze in my tracks for minutes on end, just looking at this gray river and these concrete pylons and this sort of reflecting shadow of these overhanging overpasses. And it was entrancing. It was absolutely entrancing. It was a revelation of a genuine beauty that I had never looked for. So. But then it just makes things worse, really, because why is this beautiful? Why does this happen? How do we get out of with these experiences, things like this, whether you've had encounters like this in an art museum or in some personal experience of your own, that remarkable way that a first parent, just just stop tracing their newborn child's ear and things like this. They go and they just stare at them sleeping. There's an entrancing quality here that can be hard to explain. So if we're not just going to sort of let things sit at the level of, well, I have certain feelings and you have certain feelings and that's okay. If we actually want to think about this not just as a feeling but as a reality, as something that goes all the way down, is something about who we are and how we are as people, how reality is itself, then we have to kind of press through that and let it speak to us, let it actually reveal its nature to us. So it does turn out that the farther we go into this, the more that we realize, just skipping out a bunch of the middle point stuff for you, that in order to be able to understand these random experiences that we have and their variety and the different ways in which individuals respond to them, we have to go to the source of beauty and try to understand it from there. Now, unsurprisingly, this means God himself. That if we want to understand these kind of random, seemingly lightning strike kind of individual experiences of encounters with beauty, however they encounter, you have encountered them or I have encountered them, we actually have to go right to God himself and then work our way down from there. So for St. Augustine, with whom we started, who's the first theologian in the Western Latin-speaking world to really think deeply about beauty, for him, it's obvious that God just is beauty. He just is. He says that God in himself is the beauty of all beautiful things. And the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, is, he says, simply the most perfect beauty. Okay? So that's taking it to a different realm for sure. But what is that beauty in itself? So now we know that we can have the freedom to apply that word to God, but what do we actually mean when we do so, right? So fortunately, because St. Augustine is marvelous, he does pose exactly this question. He says this, he says, what kind of beauty does God's wisdom have? Now his answer is absolutely marvelous. He says, I have no idea. Augustine, did me again. But the point is that's actually a lot more helpful than it sounds. He says, in fact, that we don't know what God's beauty is like, that I can't actually define or explain it exhaustively. But, he says, and this is the key, he says, we simply profess ourselves its lovers. Here we begin to get to the heart of it. That I can't actually give an exhaustive definition of God's beauty, because that would be to define God, to exhaust him completely in conceptual modes. But what I know immediately from the experience of God's beauty, from the experience of God himself, is that his beauty, and therefore beauty in itself, is somehow, at the very least, a mystery of attraction, of being drawn. At the very least, we are drawn by God's beauty to know him and to love him. In other words, God's beauty is a mystery of communion. But to know what that's really like, to know what it really means, is really not just a matter for a simple one-sentence explanation. Discovering what God's beauty is, what it is in itself, really, truly, and completely, this is what we mean by the Christian life. This is what we mean by the Christian life, is coming to know by living and experiencing it what God's beauty is. To know, to understand, to love God's beauty, we have to live in God's beauty. But one might reasonably ask, how do I actually do that? How does that actually happen? You know? As great as it might sound, to talk about the beauty of God, and living in the beauty of God, and having our entire life be nothing other than a kind of being drawn by the beauty of God and beginning to dwell within that, we rapidly run up against real, living problems in the fact that the world around us actually seems rather ugly, rather often. So for as much as we might be able to point to individual experiences of a kind of profound and even semi-incomprehensible sense of an encounter with beauty, you know, this newborn child, this random concrete pylon, this beautiful work of art, this piece of music, what have you, it seems that other things intrude rather forcibly into our experience rather more often. Think about what just happened in Florida. What just happened a couple of months ago in a high school outside of my hometown in Spokane, Washington. This teeny little town where there's nothing but corn. Well, not corn because it's Washington State, but wheat. Las Vegas, that horrible thing. New York, Sutherland Springs, Texas. The raw ugliness of human behavior. Just even thinking about these wild, dramatic, horrifying public displays of evil, that raw ugliness that sort of imposes itself, that fetishistic way in which we can't seem to be willing to tear the eye away from those last selfies, those last shots holding guns, you know, those images that these shooters always have of themselves, body armored up, you know, carrying weapons, all these things. There's this sort of obsessive image, this fetishization of the ugliness of the image that we can't let go of. Now it seems that it's the ugliness that draws us, and it's the ugliness that defines our experience, more than the beauty that we might like to imagine being at the heart of our experience. And in fact, from all of this, there exists a perpetually real temptation that we cannot easily dismiss or brush aside, to come to the conclusion that ultimately, whatever one believes about Jesus Christ, the world itself is fundamentally ugly. Now, this is actually where Christ comes in. Only once we get down into this heart can we actually begin to see where Christ comes in and why Christ comes in. Christ, it turns out, does not just come to give us a nice example of nice behavior that we can all follow and celebrate our niceness together, nor does he simply give us grand moral teachings that we can uphold with a holy trinity of Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi. That Jesus Christ actually reveals by being the way in which all things, everything, all of creation, shares in the beauty of God. So let me explain. A thing, anything at all, is beautiful to the extent that it shows forth God's own beauty. That is, in fact, why anything exists at all, is to manifest God's own beauty. In practice, this means that a thing is beautiful insofar as it reveals the way that it comes from God, it is what it is in God, and it goes back to God. So I've been teaching the young adults at St. Gertrude's in Cincinnati about beauty of late, and they have characterized this as my patented safety pin beauty definition, which is this way that things come down. Things come down from God, that they are what they are in God, and then they go back to God. I've made them memorize the hand gesture, and believe it or not, it works. Okay, so you have to remember. And then you ask yourself, like, wait a second, what does it actually mean for something to be beautiful? Hold on, safety pin. I prefer a sphere, but they saw a safety pin, so we're just going to work with that. Okay, that when really this is truly it. That when we're talking about the way that something is beautiful, what we're talking about is the way in which it manifests to the beholder. The way in which something comes from God, so its directionality as being originating in God, that it dwells as being what it is in its perfection in God, and that it points back to the God who made it. That this is actually what we're speaking about, technically, when we're speaking about anything being beautiful at all. But the whole problem, of course, is that in a world marked by sin, broken by our cruelty and our wickedness and our seemingly never-ending capacity to search and lust after death, it can seem like nothing in the world could really have come from God. Or, if we believe in some kind of desperate hope that things actually did come from God, it's hard to see how anything is actually dwelling in God. And even if we want to imagine that, it's hard to see, if we're just looking at the world around us, how anything actually completes the loop and points us back to God, right? Everything seems to break down and go spinning off in different directions. We can say, with Yeats in The Second Coming, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So this is where Christ comes in. This is it. This is the point. This is the weakness. This is the brokenness of the heart, the brokenness of the world, the brokenness of the human person that Christ comes to enter dramatically into and transform. This is exactly it. That Jesus, by taking to himself a human nature, reorders and reorients the human person, and through the human person, everything that exists. everything that exists through the reordering and reorienting of the human person. That in Jesus, a human nature came from God, knows and loves God in the perfection of personal union, and dwells with God forever. That he is the living enactment of what it means for anything to be beautiful at all. And this happens not exterior to us, like an interesting movie that we're watching, but it happens within our nature, within the nature that caused the problem. In Jesus, we see the actual beauty of God living in the world. And so, in Jesus, we see the actual beauty of the human being revealed and set free at last. And when we are united to Jesus in turn, we ourselves become joined to this whole cycle of beauty. And we can begin to see the beauty of the world as it was made to be, as a revelation of God. Okay. Now, I really mean this in the fullest possible sense. And let me give you an example that I like because it's so dramatically counterintuitive. So, I don't know if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but it's delightful, and you should if you haven't. So there's this incredible scene where, don't ask why, but this baby space tree, don't ask questions, ends up in this sort of like, he's been captured by these evil men, and they're kind of standing around him in a circle, and he's being pitted against this sort of like evil space rat. He's small, he's a baby space tree, and they're having like a fight contest, right? And they're sort of pouring beer on him, and they're chanting, and they're taking bets, right, about which of the two of these creatures is going to win, right? The point is, in the scene, I mean, it's in a way it's very funny in the movie the way that it's portrayed, but also it's actually very painful to watch. It's kind of like ugliness incarnate. You see the way that these like hideous men are like torturing these creatures, and the way that it's really awful and stuff. And that's kind of what it's supposed to be in the film. It's just this like absolute low point of just kind of raw bestiality, like raw cruelty on the fullness of display. Is you have these two creatures kind of pitted against each other in a fight, and they're taking bets and all that kind of stuff. And in actual reality, like the existence of dogfights and stuff like that has always seemed to me to be just the same. I mean, like the absolute essence of like disgusting grossness and ugliness. Like even reading in short stories and novels about like a dogfight or whatever is actually so awful. Like I can hardly do it. It's like skim along. It's like really. It just seemed like it'd be the essence of sort of the raw revelation of like human ugliness and cruelty, right? It's like this idea that you would pit two animals against each other and you would have them fight to the death just because whatever, you want to drink and throw money around. Okay. Well, let me give you a counterexample. So, in one of my favorite works by St. Augustine called De Ordine, On Order, Augustine's hanging out. I don't know if you know this, but Augustine, when he's in preparation for his baptism, like he goes to this like philosophical retreat house with his buddies. Like he has this rich buddy who has a house out in the country. And so he and his buddies go to live in this philosophical retreat for a couple of years, which is really fantastic. In On Order, he's describing this life that they're living. And so they're all living sleeping in a dorm-style bunks, basically. And Augustine like wakes up in the middle of the night, and he's Augustine, so he just starts chatting, and then like everybody else starts. He's like, "Hey guys, you up?" They're like, "Yes, Augustine, we're up now. Thanks, and having this hilarious conversation, and he's like, guys, we can't waste time. Like, this is so important. We have to find the truth. We have to love Jesus Christ. Like, this is incredible. They're like, Augustine, that's great. We were sleeping, but it's true. And then one of them makes this huge mistake, and he quotes a pagan poet, and Augustine is like, excuse me, we do not have time to waste with this ridiculous poetry business. Okay, this is serious. I'm talking about real business here, by the way, so like focus. Okay, he's like, excuse me, are you wasting your time reading poetry while we're reading philosophy? And he's like, yeah. He's like, knock it off. Okay, this is serious. And then like after having this long dialogue about how, kind of monologue, about how we have no time to waste because like all of life is so important, just like dwell on the truth, then they go to bed, finally. Augustine's going back to bed. And then they wake up in the morning, and they're like, let's go take a bath, because public baths, right? So they're walking to the public baths, and Augustine's at it again. He's just like, seriously though, can you even believe this guy's reading poetry? What the heck? Like we do have no time to waste. So they're walking on the baths, and I swear I'm actually not exaggerating. It's unreal. So they're walking to the baths, and they're having this conversation about how they do not have 1 second to waste. Everything has to be just about looking at Jesus Christ and understanding him better. And Augustine is like in mid-sentence lecturing his friends about this. And he's like, oh my gosh! And this is where the quote starts. All of a sudden we came across a cockfight. And eagerly we watched. What wouldn't lovers of truth and beauty be eager to see and search out? Isn't any such occasion good enough to bring the beauty of reason to bear on things known and unknown, and let it attract its followers wherever and however it can? Cannot signs of it be seen anywhere and coming from anywhere? Take that cockfight. We could see their intent heads stretched forward, hackles raised, mighty thrusts of beak and spur, uncanny dodgings. There was nothing amiss in every motion of those irrational beasts. There was clearly another reason controlling everything from on high, down to the universal law of victor and vanquished. The first crowed in triumph and puffed its feathers in a clear sign of superiority. The other had ended up with a featherless neck, voiceless and crippled. I don't know how, but everything was a hymn to the beauty and harmony of nature. I didn't make that up. It's basically the best thing ever written by a theologian. It is the very best. Okay, so the point is, we can't waste time. Don't read that stupid poetry. You are wasting your life. Oh my gosh, cockfight. Hymn to the beauty and harmony of nature, right? You think, how is this possible? How is this possible? Well, listen, it's actually getting to the heart of it. It's getting right to the heart, okay? It's because it's actually coming from his basic point, that we actually can't waste time, that everything does actually have to do with the radicality of our pursuit of coming to understand how everything comes from God, how everything dwells in being what it is in God and points us back to him. You see, everything about this hymn to beauty that he's seeing in this cockfight is about the way in which these irrational creatures have about them a glorious artistry, a glorious craftsmanship, as it were, a glorious beauty just in being what they are. They don't have to do anything. They just are what they are. And that reveals to the seeing eye the way in which they come from God, dwell in him, and go back to him. Even when they are doing things like that animals do, which is like fight and peck at each other. Here's what's at the heart of this. Here's what's at the heart of it that gives Augustine this actually uncomfortable freedom to see in the cockfight a hymn to the beauty and harmony of nature. It's holiness. It's holiness. Holiness reveals beauty in everything because it beautifies the one who beholds. Holiness reveals beauty in all things because it makes the one who sees beautiful. That to see beauty at all, we must be made something that we are not. Beautiful. To see God's beauty, we must actually become beautiful with God's own beauty. And that there's such a depth to this, that the horizon to this is so infinite, that it doesn't just mean that those who love God are free to look at, a newborn child, a beautiful landscape, cute animals like koalas, and see something of the glory, manifest of the God who made them, but to look at everything that is and come to understand, come to let the thing speak of the way that it comes from God, is what it is in God, and goes back to him. This is, in fact, exactly what Augustine does. In a different passage, he's this beautiful, beautiful description of the way in which, having discovered the beauty of God, the essence of God as beauty, he says he wants the created world to begin to speak to him about who God is. And he says, my question, he turns to the, as it were, turns to the things of the natural world. And he said, my question to them was my inquiring spirit, this open gaze to behold and to see what they would reveal to him. And he says, fascinatingly, their answer was their beauty. That in being set free to see the way that all things that are come from God and dwell in God and point back to him, we can question with our hearts and our spirits and look with a courageous and even discomforting honesty to begin to see the way that everything reveals to us nothing less than the beauty of the face of God. But we have to accept this at its deepest level, which begins with the recognition that now we are not beautiful. Now we are not. That we are not made beautiful with the beauty for which we were made. That the image of God in us, for which we were made and by which we were made, comes to its being in us disfigured, marred, soot-covered and hidden. That we see only ugliness when we are ugly ourselves. We see ugliness when we let ourselves see ourselves. When I let myself be the lens through which I look at the world. Because all I allow myself to experience is my own wounds, my own weaknesses, my own failures, my own losses and betrayals, love that was failed to receive, love that was failed to be given. And I see only ugliness, and then I look out at the world and I see only ugliness, and then I look back at myself and I find ugliness reduplicated. But this is not that for which we were made. It's not. This is not what we were made for. The highest beauty given to us on earth, given to the human person as we dwell in the world, is this, what Augustine says. He says, everything that is rightly ordered, which is also named virtue. Virtue. Now he begins to get a fascinating idea that in order for us actually to be able to see what the things of the world are revealing in their being, which is to say, their own beauty, as a borrowed irradiation of the beauty of God, we actually ourselves have to be made beautiful by the proper ordering of the person, which is what we mean when we speak about virtue. That the beauty that is proper to the human person, most complete and proper to the human person, is not, as in my case, the glory of the unibrow, or the gloriously bald chrome dome, which I know everyone envies, nor is it, a certain physique or what have you. That the beauty for which we are made, that actually shows forth the radiance of the human creature, is the beauty of virtue, the beauty of righteousness. Now, this does still seem to get us into a bit of trouble, because that seems to, again, be sort of the whole problem, right? If we knew exactly how to make ourselves virtuous, or if we came to ourselves with virtue already in place as a pre-installed consumer package, then this whole situation wouldn't be quite so difficult. But of course, that's not how we come to ourselves. We come to ourselves rather like making the mistake of buying a computer off of Craigslist, where you discover that suddenly there's no operating system built into this, and there's no Microsoft Word doesn't exist, and there's a bunch of viruses. Like, what did I buy? This is basically like, listen, I don't want. You bought yourself off of Craigslist, okay? This is my point, all right? This is how you come to yourself. Like, not nice factory pre-installed operating system and software, all right? Just a little bit, not exactly what you were hoping for. But everything's there, just in potential. Okay, so how do we get there? All right, how do we actually get there? Again, through the very heart, like the dramatic, living, actual heart of what Christ does on the earth. That we know that one thing that what he is on the earth is the living revelation, the living being of the beauty of God, himself actually living into the human nature, that whole beautiful mode of coming from God, dwelling in the perfection of God, and going back to him. But then what does he do as a perpetual living reality in the human person? What does he do? Well, Augustine, again, marvelously speaks about the wonderful exchange by which Christ came to receive insults and give honors, to receive ugliness and to make beautiful. We could speak of a beautiful exchange that Christ comes to bring. This saving work of Jesus Christ is the way that he comes to be, as it were, made ugly in order to make humanity beautiful. This is what Augustine says in his commentary on Psalm 45. He says that he comes to his bride, the church, human beings, in her ugliness, that she might not remain ugly. He rid her of her ugliness and formed beauty in her. So now you see, this gets right to the heart of it, because there's always this secret temptation, this secret desire to believe that at some level or another, I kind of have to impress God. Like I have to impress God a little bit with like what I've done with the things that he's given me, there but for the grace of God go I, but I have done a pretty phenomenal job with the things that God has given me. And that guy has clearly done a pretty bad job, but he hasn't done as good of a job with his grace as I have. There's always this kind of secret sneaking temptation to think that the way in which I'm saved is that God looks at me at some level or another and is like pretty impressed. And it's like, wow, grade A, jumbo, That's not the way that it works. That's not the way that it works. Also, the kind of morose, mopey version of that is to say, like, I do have to come to God, and that ultimately I have to impress God, but like I'm basically awful, and like everything goes wrong all the time, and so like God would never be impressed at me, so it's like grade F reject, can't even serve as a Taco Bell, But you see, it's just the happy sad version of the same thing, right? But this is not how it is. That Christ comes to us in our ugliness, so that he can form beauty within us, which is to say, so that he can set us, you, me, the human person, free with the beauty by which we were made and for which we were made. That the wrongness of things being all out of order and out of whack, having all the wrong having all these viruses instead of all this helpful software, that can get all fixed and put into proper order by the beauty of Christ himself, by being joined actually in our persons, by the grace of the sacrament of baptism, by the beautifying effects of the liberation from sin in confession, by the gloriously beautiful food of the Holy Eucharist, that we are actually being made beautiful with God's own beauty in these dramatic realities. Now, I think it's clear that there is a necessarily ascetical dimension to the aesthetical element of the Christian life. Yes, you can use that. It's okay. No, it's true, because our aesthetics has to be an ascetics. It has to be ascetical. It has to do with our putting off of the old man, our secret love for the ugliness that is ours, our secret kind of comfort in, oh my gosh, if you ever talked like a 10-year-old boy, or if you've ever been a 10-year-old boy, sorry. If you've ever been one, you just know, like, oh my gosh, I remember getting in the hugest fights. I got in so much trouble because my parents wanted me to take a shower. And I was like, absolutely not. This is not going to happen. Because it's great the way it is, it's just like these clothes never need to be washed, neither does my body, it smells just the way it's supposed to smell, We just learn to love the ugliness that is ours, right? And so there's an actually ascetical, penitential element to being willing to put off the old man, to put off the ugliness, the squalor of the life of old, and to perpetually put on the new, to receive by God's grace new forms of action, that everything that we do can be in obedience to the form of God's beauty, that it may come from God, may flourish in the mode in which God gives it to us, and so it can lead us and others back to the drama of God's own beauty. This is it. This is why Christ came. Augustine put it this way. He says, Christ came that we can be transformed from an ugly form into a beautiful one. Now, there's an incredibly dramatic sentence-long Latin play on words there, which I'm just going to read to you so that you can get the sense of what it sounds like. Deformi forma formosum transformatur in formam. Just everything about this is about the conversion from deformity to the beautiful well-formedness of being made and remade by the grace of Jesus Christ. And the astonishing drama of this is that the beauty of Christ is necessarily the beauty of the cross, in which we discover, finally and at last, the revelation of the great lie, that ugliness does not and cannot have the last word about what it means to be. What we find in the cross is the utter defeat of ugliness by ugliness. It's the definitive revelation that literally nothing can stop the beauty of God's love. And we are only remade into that beauty, the beauty of the cross, by being ourselves joined to it and so purified and healed of our ugly pettiness and sins. Now, this is an astonishing freedom, to begin to actually let everything about our lives be drawn into the beautifying mystery of the cross, and so be conquered from within, set into right order, and revealed as it comes to us from God dwells in God and leads us back to Him. So that even, and this is a little bit uncomfortable and kind of astonishing, even our own vices and weaknesses can begin to speak to us of the beauty of God, insofar as they reveal precisely the heart of the way in which I particularly need to be set free by the beauty of God. St. Augustine takes this actually uncomfortable totality of beauty, the way in which all things that are begin to speak to us, drawn into the ugliness-defeating beauty of the cross, that all things speak in Christ crucified of the beauty of God. And he says it like this, and it's so marvelous that I simply can't resist quoting it in its entirety. He says, speaking of Christ, beautiful as God, as the Word who was with God, he is beautiful in the Virgin's womb, where he did not lose his Godhead, but assumed our humanity. Beautiful he is as a baby, as the Word unable to speak, because while he was still without speech, still a baby in arms and nourished at his mother's breast, the heavens spoke for him. A star guided the Magi, and he was adored in the manger as food for the humble. He was beautiful in heaven then, and beautiful on earth, beautiful in the womb, and beautiful in his parents' arms. He was beautiful in his miracles, but just as beautiful under the scourges. Beautiful as he invited us to life, but beautiful too in not shrinking from death, beautiful in laying down his life, and beautiful in taking it up again. Beautiful on the cross, beautiful in the tomb, and beautiful in heaven. Listen to this song to further your understanding, and do not allow the weakness of his flesh to blind you to the splendor of his beauty. The goal of the Christian life is nothing other than this: to act beautifully in beauty. That having been made beautiful by the beauty of Christ, we can see in all things nothing less than the revelation of the beauty of the God who made them for himself. That we can see with Christ's own liberating and beautifying vision beauty, even where the world sees nothing but ugliness. In this, we discover we are beautiful. In this, we are drawn to Christ. Augustine says, "The devil begot you as an ugly child when he made you a sinner. But God, who justifies the ungodly, gives you a new birth as a beautiful creature." Thank you very much.
5-minute break and then questions. All right, question and answer time. Now, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. I'm sure you can be carried in the room, but you can't be carried all the way to the internet. No one's voice is that loud. So wait till I get the microphone to you. So you are right out of the gate back there. So first question.
I need to wait for the mic.
Yes.
There's another dimension to this, and of course, the word beatific vision, and how so many saints like Teresa of Avila and others have, like, you see these holy cards with, they're experiencing the beatific vision, and of course, beatific means, comes from beautiful, and beatitudes from beautiful, or they're all rooted in that same word, beatus or whatever, the Latin. Any comment on all this beauty and the beatific vision and this transformation of, one thing that I wanted to also ask, and beauty and suffering, and we can see Jesus impassioned, and if we see it with love, you can see the beauty in it. But if you don't have the love in there, it's just like a really horrific event, not very pretty at all, or not even the potential of beauty. Of course, April 1st is coming up, and it's I think it's just too cool that, he's crucified on Friday, and on Sunday it's like, April Fool, I'm still alive, But any commentary on any of the things I just said there?
Sure. Now etymologically, it's a little bit different. The beatific vision comes from the word for good and blessed, and the word for they look similar in English, but in Latin the words we're talking about for beauty are pulchritudo and pulchrum, so not particularly related there. But the point there is very important. Jumping from Augustine to St. Thomas Aquinas, who begins to kind of refine some of these ideas, he makes this point that basically what we're talking about in the like the anthropological sense, like what is happening in the human person when we behold something beautiful, is the same thing that we're talking about in contemplation. Now, this is natural contemplation, so it's just not to do with grace yet, which is that all the powers of the human person, the intellect, the will, the senses, are all drawn to the same object at the same time. So if you think about, if you've ever had experience of like very profoundly engaging with, like say a painting or a piece of music or something like that, or cradling a newborn, something like that, where you just feel like everything is like zzz, drawn into a single thing, that's what we call this natural contemplation, where all of your powers are kind of engaged simultaneously on this one single object. So that's, naturally speaking, the highest thing that the human being is capable of. So then we see the way that grace transforms that. And we realize that the supernatural contemplation of prayer, even on this earth, of encounters with God, is an elevation of that natural contemplation to where all the powers of the human person are concentrated on God, right, all at once. And that this is ultimately the destination of the human person, that this is what we're made for, is the contemplation of God's beauty with everything that we are, that like, heaven is not like boring. Heaven is everything that we are being engaged simultaneously in adoring the beauty of the God who made us, right? So that's the idea. That's kind of what we're meaning when we say the beatific vision, not just like the beatific watching of TV, but that's what you do in nursing homes, I guess. But that everything that we are is focused all at once in the highest possible way on God Himself. Okay, so there's that. About beauty and suffering. So obviously this is a whole sub-theme in the talk, is about beauty and suffering, the ugliness of evil, and the way in which beauty is transformed by it. Fundamentally, what's missing from an ugly reading of the cross is not, strictly speaking, love. What's missing from it is God. If Christ is not God, then the cross is just another disgusting human reality. If Christ, so that's the first thing, and they're actually fascinating. You can look at like atheist painters who paint the crucifixion, and you can see the way in which they're revealing it to be that. Thomas Eakins has this fascinating atheist crucifixion. Anyway, it's fascinating how this plays out in the way in which the artist beholds the thing that he's painting. But anyway, and so then and then out of that, if we add in what's missing, God, this is God, then we can begin to discover the beauty of the way in which the whole human being is reordered to God by having its brokenness sort of shattered from within. That the claim of death on life, the claim of ugliness over beauty, the claim of cruelty over goodness is finally at last pushed to its very utmost and shown to be powerless. Right? That's why this is not a thing that Christ could have just told us, that he had to live it in his body, in everything that he was, so that we could see it happening and know that it was true. Know that there was actually no limit to the amount of ugliness and evil that Christ can destroy and transform into union with himself. And this is ultimately the life-giving hidden spring in all of our ugliness, in all of our suffering, in all of that in our life that seems most to undermine the claim of beauty. We follow this secret spring, and we see the way that it flows from Christ's pierced side and leads us back there. Other questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. That was very inspiring. So I enjoyed your beauty as a hairpin analogy, right?
Safety pin.
Oh, safety.
Hairpins are straight. It doesn't work.
You're right.
Safety pin.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, I got the motions. So could you help me understand exactly how that works and how that helps us understand what beauty is? Could you apply that to something specific, like giving us a specific example of like a sunrise, like this is how it works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Absolutely. Okay, I've got to control myself. I don't want to go off here. I'm going to use a piece of art because that's helpful. Because everyone agrees that a sunset is like really beautiful, right? Nobody says like, sunsets, whatever. Like, I don't need them. Nobody says that. But like different works of art, like people will say that. Be like, that sucks. That's awful. And other people will be very moved by it, right? So then it's with works of art that we begin to really see this whole crisis. Like, is beauty in fact just subjective? Is it just in the eye of the beholder? Is it really just is it really in fact ultimately a matter of my feelings? So here's the whole fascinating thing, that the function of a work of art, like as it were, or the function, quote unquote, what it does is the same dramatic reality that everything else does, which is actually to reveal something about reality, something about the way that reality operates, which is to say something about the way that reality comes from God, dwells in him, and leads us back to him. Now this includes works of art made by people who do not believe in God, who even believe themselves to be opposing God, whatever, right? Because this is actually just what a work of art does, kind of its nature, unless it's been denatured such that it no longer points back. And that's where we have like really genuinely ugly works of art, not just like I don't like them, but like genuinely ugly. That's what we're talking about, is that they've been literally denatured so that they do not point in the right direction. Now, if we're talking about anything else, like a work of art that actually does what a work of art is what a work of art does, then we do actually fascinatingly see a little bit of now we begin to see where the beholder actually does come into this, right? Because the art is an objective reality. It does what it does. It is what it is. It reveals something about the world, and not please, I'm not thinking like in a specific, like these three theses kind of way, like it's saying this, it's saying that. No, I mean in a much more intuitive, genuine sense about the way that art actually operates. But now I come to it, and I might say, no thanks, and walk along, I have not now actually engaged with the mode of revelation that art is. And we're talking about revelation in its natural sense now, right? We're not talking about it coming from God yet. I haven't actually engaged with it. So the piece of art is doing what the piece of art does, but like I just walk on by, But if I actually pause and let myself really attend to what's happening, like really pay attention, do not just like wait for my emotions to strike, but actually maybe do the study, learn what's happening, learn who this artist is, learn what he's doing, learn what's happening in this painting, etc., etc., then I can begin to actually see the way. If the painting is saying anything true at all, I could begin to see the way in which that truth is actually revealing something about the way that reality comes from God, dwells in him, and points us back to him, whether it's a piece of art made by a Christian or not. Does that make basic sense? That's a very kind of theoretical, high-level answer, but anything more, and I would get very dragged into the weeds of talking about my favorite pieces of art. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, great. Another question?
Thanks for your talk tonight. Can you help me reconcile the two ideas that, like your computer Craigslist analogy, that we have a lot of potential for virtue and beauty and greatness? How does that reconcile with that we are currently made in the image of God and we are, worthy of dignity and love and all? Not just we are potentially great and beautiful. Yeah, right. Well, sticking with the analogy here for a second, like if I make this huge mistake and buy like a virus riddled late 1990s e-machine from Craigslist, it's not going to have anything that I want on it, but it does have the potential to have the things that I want on it. It's still a computer. It has these kinds of functionality. If there's enough there, like we can sort of work with it to like install Windows and the programs that I want, and then I'll be up and running, with like Minecraft like everybody else or whatever. If I'm a 10-year-old boy, but like I can take a rock, and I don't care how hard I work on that rock, I'm never going to get Windows to operate on this rock, right? Because it's not the kind of thing that can do that. Right? So there's a certain sense in which this is what being in the image of God is like, that because we are in the image of God, we have things about us that are so glorious and so radiant and so powerful that they are literally immortal, which is the way in which we know and the way in which we love. However corrupted and however damaged they are literally undying. Once they come into being, they never cease to be. That is a big deal. And that, like, this is the effect of what we're talking about. We're saying being made in the image of God, that only we have this thing that's so astonishing that actually comes from a direct participation in who God is. That he is the knower and the lover who shares that with us in a way so that we properly in our own persons actually know and love, with our own knowing and loving as direct coming from God and directing us back to him. So just being the kind of thing that we are is necessarily in the image of God, but it's still actually very damaged and very broken. Not because it was made that way, but because it had become that way through the original injustice of the first sin and its legacy in original sin. This is what some of the early fathers of the church would talk about as being that we are both in the image of God and unto his likeness. This is a scriptural turn of phrase, that we're in the image of God just by being human creatures. We are automatically made to be what we are as being in the image of God, with an actually infinite potential to be united with the divine lover. But we are also unto his likeness. We are also unto the process of becoming that way, of becoming united with the one who made us for himself. So there is an essential, actually ineluctable dignity about the human person, about us as being in the image of God, which one can never violate for any reason whatsoever, but that we don't just sort of rest on our laurels with that, that actually drives us to recover by the grace of Christ and his beautifying glory from the original tragedy that has marred us in original sin, and the tragedy of our own devising, which is the ugliness that we create freely by the trauma of our own sins. So it's that realization of what we always already have in be and are, in being in the image of God, that being realized in the beautifying glory of Christ, that actually is our Christian life. Yeah. Another question?
Thank you, Father, for the talk. With regards to the definitions you put forward from, what was it, Hegel, Schelling, and Kant, are they all atheists?
That is such a complicated question. Do they believe in God in the way that we believe in God? Probably not.
Is one of the inherent shortfalls, I guess, with their definitions? I mean, it seems like the truth behind beauty that you keep speaking of is a reflection of God himself. And therefore, when they're trying to use sort of the highest degree of the form or whatever they call it, a reflection of the essence of whatever the matter is, they're simply trying to use other terms for a reflection of God itself. Is that fair to say or no?
So that's interesting. I do think that a strictly materialist vision of the world is going to make beauty not make sense. Like we can, the materialist philosophies of beauty that I'm familiar with are generally just kind of coasting on the fumes of a culture that used to believe in God, you know. It's usually not quite aware that's what they're doing. They're kind of coasting along on the strength of everyone's still wanting to think as if God existed, even if they really don't believe it, that he does, you know. So, because ultimately, if you have a strictly materialist vision of the world, like no transcendence, no permanence, nothing from the outside. I mean, even thinking of God in that kind of in that kind of sense, like eventually you're going to discover that beauty doesn't actually make sense, and that it really does reduce to feeling and individual response. These men they're doing something very fascinating with trying to create a philosophy of beauty, especially Kant, as like a philosophy of cognition, like the way that thinking works. So what he's doing is very complicated and kind of wonderful in its own way, but it's not quite the same. It's a very different reality than looking at it theologically. So yeah.
Thank you very much for taking my question. As we, ideally by the grace of God, become beautiful and more fully perceive everything as a hymn to the beauty and harmony of nature, how do you perceive that this will affect our ability, or those who become beautiful, their ability to perceive the ugliness and be compassionate towards the ugliness of others?
That's a marvelous question, right? And we really don't have to look happily any farther than Mother Teresa, right? So this is such a fascinating example. I forget, you broached the question about like what happens if we look at the cross without love, then all we see is ugliness. Now, what a fascinating example, actually, because we see in Mother Teresa specifically this, that she had allowed herself to be beautified by the beauty of God, through her life of real like self-abnegation, you know, of that she had this very deep spirituality of being united with this kind of abysmal self-emptying of Christ, of kind of going, she was just seeking after the very heart of the cross, you know, she's sort of enraptured with this, with the humility of Christ going all the way down into the ugliness of death and sin and ugliness itself on the cross, and that glorious inversion and transformation that he works through this. So she was sort of her life was like accompanying Christ in that, you know, which is why there were these revelations at the end after she died that she had spent so much of it in spiritual darkness is because she was actually being given, like in act, the thing that she was desiring in her spirit. So it's very beautiful, but also very painful. So, which is to say that she had kind of offered her life to Christ. Christ had given her this very particular grace of really living a certain dimension of the cross at the forefront of her experience. And in living the kind of ugly heart of the human ugliness that is revealed in order to be destroyed on the cross, she actually began to become beautiful with that beautifying reality of the cross itself. So if you read the way that she talks about her work, that she speaks about encountering people in the ugliest possible modes of the human experience, people who don't believe it, she has these huge critics. I don't know if you know about this, but there are people who are just like, they love to hate on Mother Teresa, And her critics are always these atheists who don't see, who misread what she's doing. And they say, like, she's not even trying to fight poverty. She's just saying, like, your life is awful and you should love Jesus. Yeah, like, we're not even trying to fight poverty, because she wasn't trying to fight poverty. She's really clear about this. Like, my point is not to end world poverty. That her point was to find people whose lives had been consumed by the deepest kinds of human ugliness, and to love them from the place of the ugliness of the cross, and so let their ugliness be transformed from within into the beauty of the cross. That's what she did. That's what she did, was to actually enact, by the grace of Christ, the inversion of ugliness into beauty that is the cross. And that's what it is like to live in one of the missionary of charity homes. They do not cease to be poor. They do not cease to be miserable. They do not cease to die. But they are given an incredible moment, an incredible accompaniment of the beauty of Christ, to suddenly have revealed to them something that nobody has ever told them ever, which is that precisely at the heart of their ugliness they will find Christ. That Christ is already waiting for them there. That they do not have to clean up their act. They do not have to get better. They do not have to become valuable members of society. Christ is already there in the midst of their utter abandonment, and they can die with him there. And they would not choose to die anywhere else. Any other questions?
Was there another question over here last time?
Sure. Well, in tandem to that, so to speak, in tandem to that, when I was talking about love on the cross, it's God who loves, and that's the difference. I always thought that the crucifixion was not that big a deal because there were so many others that were crucified, but it was God who was crucified. It was Jesus, the Messiah, which makes the thing a lot different. At the same time, with this, you're talking about the person in the street of Calcutta who experiences this love, and unconditionally, as he is or as she is, and that's also true for us in our own poverty. When I don't think I can do anything positive or anything holy, I should say, anything holy without knowing that God loves me, that's where it starts, that the Holy Spirit loves us as we are, but thank God he doesn't leave us there, as the expression goes. So, with this, the beauty of God is that he loves me, and that he will continue to love me with my faults, and that I understand I need to cooperate with that grace in order to really be what he wants me to be. And I begin to see that I am his child, and I'm not just someone who's groveling like the prodigal son, groveling for forgiveness, but that I'm welcomed into the home. So that's all. That wasn't a question. I know that wasn't a question. But
Sure.
You can respond to that when you want to.
Sure, so I don't know if you've ever seen this this great tragedy of early 2000s rom-coms, Bridget Jones's Diary, but in it, don't judge, okay? It was when I was young, I was stupid. All right, we've all been there. Okay, please. There's this incredible scene in it where so Bridget Jones, who's just basically it's like Bridget Jones colon like a terrible person, right? And like there's this but like Mr. Darcy, oh I'm sorry, he's not Mr. but he's obviously Mr. Darcy, like falls in love with her anyway. This is like when Pride and Prejudice miniseries was a big deal, so like Mr. Darcy falls in love with her and like blah blah blah, and that's all great. And he says at one point like that he loves her just as she is, and like but keeping in mind that she's actually like a horrible person, and like the movie makes a big deal about this, like that this is a big deal that he loves her just as she is, and in a way that's like a kind of Christian love. Like it almost sounds like Christian love, like wow, she's really horrible, but like he loves her just as she is, and he doesn't want her to change. Like he just loves her the way that she is. Like that's really great, unconditional love. Well, yes and no, right? Because like this is basically the only good thing about this movie, is that it brings out exactly what's right and wrong about that. The movie doesn't know what it's doing, but it does. Is that we have these two conflicting senses, that we want God to love us just as we are. We feel this need that he would like accept me as I am, but then also I recognize that what I am is like kind of a hot mess, and is like really, I would at the same time, if I have any honesty in me at all, kind of prefer not to go to heaven just like exactly like this, like maybe a little bit different, at least, please, and so this is what we discover, and this is why this whole notion of Christ as the beautifier becomes so powerful as a motive force for our spiritual life. That I have the freedom to begin to realize that the love for Christ, which finds me in the depths of my ugliness, doesn't actually just hang out there. Like, isn't it great? Life is horrible, and isn't that amazing? Like, doesn't just hang out with me there. But that it actually that finding Christ already waiting there in the depth of the ugliness that is mine actually has already changed it to be the place from which and in which I am moved into the beauty of Christ, right? This is the whole astonishing revelation. I'm not going to get too much into it, but if you read or saw the book Silence by Shusaku Endo or the movie by Martin Scorsese, that's like the big Christological problem that Endo and Scorsese get wrong, is that they see hanging out with Christ in suffering, like they get down there, but then they don't get anywhere else. Like Christ just meets you in your suffering, and it's like, hey, yeah, I'm on the cross, you're suffering, life is awful, great.